Hello, my name is Brian, and with some basic building skills, I decided to take on a car project that was way above my skill level, while on a shoestring budget. I set out a few years back to build the Jeep of my dreams, a body-swapped Willys Wagon onto a Jeep Wrangler frame. So follow along to see if I can actually pull this project off in a tiny garage.
Oh God, I got a lot to go.
I always dreamed of rebuilding an old car that I could take my family on adventures in. I've been driving the same Jeep Wrangler since I was 20 and was pretty familiar with its huge variety of aftermarket parts. I'd also fallen in love with the style of the Willys Wagon and its affordability. After daydreaming over some forums where I had seen body swaps of the same car, I decided that without much know-how, I could somehow pull this off myself. I ran this daydream past a good friend of mine whose can-do spirit is contagious. I'm pretty sure I only heard what I wanted to hear, and that message was, I could somehow do this. That same friend was instrumental in getting many of the big and complicated pieces finished. From using his tow truck to lift the body off and welding on pieces that my improving skills couldn't really handle. The whole time he was encouraging and was always quick with a, "It can be done, it'll just take a little time." In order for the body of the Willys Wagon to sit within the rails of the LJ Wrangler, I actually had to cut the frame on both sides for it to slide back properly. Otherwise, the tail end of the Willys would have stood up too much and would have looked almost like a race car pointing down towards the engine. With the cutouts finished, I then had to remove all of the existing body mounts on the TJ Wrangler frame so that new mounts for the Willys Wagon could be mounted and welded into place. It wasn't uncommon for my friend to come over and point out areas that needed further grinding down in order for him to be more able to easily weld onto the frame. His dedication to perfect welding was something that I aspired to and hope to reach his level at some point in the future. This project actually started off with one Willys Wagon and has ended with another. I initially purchased a 1949 Willys Wagon from Southern California, sight unseen. I had my older brother take a look at it, and he made it seem as though it was in pretty good shape, and I guess from his perspective it was, considering how old it was. But once we got it home, I realized that maybe this vehicle would be better just for fitment purposes, rather than having it be a end-of-the-road Willys that I was going to be using. If you're wondering, I bought the Willys Wagon from Southern California. I paid $1,500 for it, and over the time of owning it, I parted out the pieces I didn't need. By the end, after selling the whole thing, I made $3,030. With that money, I was able to buy a 2005 Chevy Vortec Gen 3 LM7 engine, which is a 5.3-liter V8 engine, approximately 90,000 miles on it. I was able to couple that with a 2004 Chevy Suburban 4L60E automatic transmission that had 30,000 miles on it that I paid $300 for. Between the engine and the transmission, I roughly spent $1,800. Since the plan was to take this vehicle off-road with my family, I decided that I was going to need rail guards underneath it to prevent further body damage on the vehicle. With the help of my friend, we were able to fabricate some pretty beefy rail guards. Part of it, though, required me to cut off a piece of the fender so that I would have access to the bolts that attach the fender to the undercarriage of the vehicle. The rail guards we designed were going to be welded directly to the frame. If I had to do this over again, I'd probably come up with a different design so that the body of the Willys could be easily removed from the frame. As it is right now, we have to use straps that go through the roof of the body in order to pull it off, as there is no easy way to get access to the frame. The amount of time that was put into the frame was totally worth it. Sadly, by the time the vehicle got home, it was pretty hard to tell how much work or how little work had been done, because the majority of it had been done on the frame in order to set it up for a body. The rail guards that went along the side were very heavy duty. I got the opportunity to not only watch my friend weld, but also learn how to use a pipe bender. A lot of geometry from high school came into place when we went through this whole project. I finally was able to bring the Willys home to my house and begin working on it there. I wanted to test things out. I decided to hold on to the speedometer from the 49. People are probably cringing at this point because I'm putting 49 gauges into a 53 Willys, which is what I eventually ended up buying. It had been suggested to me that because of the amount of bodywork that would be required on the 49 that I had, that maybe it was a better idea to look for another Willys. So I ended up finding one on Craigslist about 3 hours north of where I live. We settled on a price, and I believe I paid $32.50 for it. It was a running vehicle, but not exactly what I wanted. On the 3.5-hour drive back, towing this home, I was actually able to find a buyer for the frame and engine, essentially all of the running gear. If I remember correctly, I think he paid $1,500 for it. So I was back to square one with a better shaped body and a lot of parts. I'm not sure the owner really understood what he had. In the back of his Willys were 2 gigantic plastic bins of parts. I really didn't know what was inside of them, but I figured if it was related to a Willys wagon, it was probably putting me in a good spot. By the time I got home and began going through the parts, I realized that a significant amount of the parts were not ones I would need for my build, but could be sold to multiple people interested in the parts and hopefully recoup back a significant portion of what I spent. The whole goal here was essentially a pie-in-the-sky dream of building a budget dream car in my garage to cart my family and I around on our adventures. Since I really didn't need it to be a restoration and more of a resto-mod, whereas the outside of the vehicle would look old, but things on the inside were actually modern, I started focusing on things to make simple pleasures like air conditioning, heat, windshield wipers all work with modern internals, but vintage externals. In this case, the original Willys used to have a lever that would lift a hood scoop, allowing air to come in and cool you. I didn't need any of that, and it was taking up much needed under dash space. So I took out the hood scoop, cut out any of the framing below it so that this could be mounted on top of the hood. I also didn't want to get into the business of welding in patch panels and sealing this over. So from the outside it'll look just like the original would with the hood scoop top, but there would be nothing underneath it. This allowed me to do a couple of things. One, save on having to pay someone to potentially weld it in or doing it myself and screwing up. The other piece is it gave me a lot more room underneath the dash. Remember, I said I was going to be installing an AC system in it. It takes up a ton of room, and the less I have underneath the dash, the higher up it can be mounted. After grinding down the portion of the framing that allowed air in, I decided that it was probably a good idea to have a way to pin this into place where the hood scoop was. So I decided to weld in a couple of bolts. The purpose of this was to have another piece essentially sandwiching this piece down to the top of the hood scoop, and the other part would be from the inside. What this would allow me to do, hopefully, and maybe I'm not thinking this through, is that if at some point I needed to gain access to under the dash, I'd have one more point of access through the hood scoop area. There was another issue, or two actually, that I ran into. One, my rear axle was not centered within the wheel well of the Willys wagon. The other piece was I was going to go with the existing Jeep Wrangler fuel tank, which was set up for fuel to be inserted on the driver's side. But on a Willys wagon, it comes in on the passenger side. After a little bit of research, I found a couple of people who had basically used the Wrangler frame and existing gas tank and had routed different types of piping to run from the passenger side to the driver's side. With that in mind, I started going down that path. I know a lot of people are saying, why wouldn't you just create your own gas tank, weld it up? That's not something I'm great at. It would have taken me forever, and I thought, let's just stick with what we have in line. If for some reason this particular system doesn't work out, then down the line I can drop the fuel tank again and put in a custom fuel tank with the fuel coming in on the passenger side. In the meantime, I ran a pretty large fuel line that runs across the top of the gas tank. Because the Willys wagon was different than the Wrangler, I had a lot of space on the top, which allowed me to run this very thick hose across the top. Dropping and then reinstalling the gas tank multiple times was a huge pain, but it gave me an opportunity to see how much room I had and make sure that things would fit. Dropping it in and out multiple times allowed me to see how much tolerance I truly would have. In the end, I was very happy with how this came out, coupled with moving the whole gas tank back. I then mated the two types of gas caps so that the two gas caps on the exterior would look like a Willys, but on the internal would be a Wrangler. I did this for a couple of reasons. One, just ease of use. Two, it allowed me to have a piece that, should I ever need to replace it again, it's probably much easier to source a TJ Wrangler gas cap than it would be another Willys gas cap. I was really unfamiliar with fuel systems, and I had to do a lot of reading in order to kind of understand how many fuel lines going in and out of the tank I would need, plus a vent line. In the end, I kind of figured it out. I was going to bypass the system for the evap system that was associated with the original Jeep Wrangler, because I wouldn't need it necessarily in a 53 Willys wagon. So instead, I had a vent cap that I drilled and put inside of the fuel tunnel that is used for the fueling line. Like I mentioned earlier, the fuel system, or the fuel routing for the fuel tank, and centering the rear axle were two big obstacles I had to overcome. What I learned as I did some research on a couple of forums was that it was not uncommon for people to move the fuel tank back on the LJ Wrangler by cutting out one of the cross members. There were two identical cross members in the back with the same drill holes in both. I removed one, which allowed me to move the gas tank back 5 inches. I was able to catch all 4 of the bolts on the rear and only 2 of the 3 on the front. So rather than the gas tank being held up by 7, it was now being held up by 6. I felt like that was a pretty good compromise considering everything else that I gained, which was the ability to adjust the axle much further back so that it could be centered in the wheel well. The other piece of this was getting the fuel into the fuel tank without it being a problem. Obviously, on the Willys, it comes in on the passenger side, and on a Wrangler, it comes in on the driver's side. Like I stated before, I didn't want to build a new gas tank, so I used the existing one I had. I purchased a fuel hose online and routed that across the top of the tank. I've been told that there's a chance that it might back up as the gas comes out pretty quick when you go to a gas station, but I went with as big a gauge as possible, and I don't think it's going to be a problem. Who knows? Maybe the 90 degree and 45 degree angle that I have further down on the other side will cause it to back up quickly, but I feel like the amount of time and effort it would have taken in order to create a new gas tank would far outweigh any inconvenience that I experience with a gas pump that is slow to fill. Here's another perspective of the routing that was done. So you can see where I used both a 90 and a 45 in order to run that line over into that side of the fuel tank. I know a lot of you are probably saying I could have rotated that fuel tank around, but I can't because of its shape. This whole process, like I said, allowed me to move this axle back. I had adjustable control arms from Curry. I bought secondhand somewhere, I think on Craigslist. At the same time, I kind of replaced all the bolts and nuts throughout so that they're easily to get on and off. The 2006 Wrangler I had bought had come, I think, from Utah, so it experienced some pretty heavy-duty winters. I also had to have some sway bar links that were longer. I found those on Facebook Marketplace and was able to get them for a song so that they would adjust for the, I think, 4-inch lift that I decided to do in the back. The progress that I made was able to allow me to get a couple more boxes checked off of my to-do list, something that has been very slow going.
The benefit here is I can check another box off this list. Oh God, I got a lot to go.